Goodbye to hell. He laughed by kicking his girlfriend from the running train door. The sun was setting on the horizon as the couple boarded the train, casting a golden glow over everything. It was meant to be a special trip, a journey to mark a new beginning in their lives. She looked at him with trust and admiration, memories of how they first met flashing in her mind. They'd crossed paths in college, two people from completely different worlds. She had been shy, focused and reserved, with dreams of becoming something big despite all odds. Her life had been marked by loss. She'd lost her parents young and learned to fend for herself, carrying a strength and quiet resilience that many overlooked. Her boyfriend, on the other hand, had grown up in privilege. He was the son of one of the city's most influential politicians, a man known for his power and reach. Life had always been easy for him. His father's name alone could open doors others could only dream of. In college, he'd been charming and charismatic, with a confidence that seemed unshakable. Many were drawn to him, fascinated by his power and the allure that came with his family's influence. For her, he was the embodiment of everything she thought she'd never have, a life of security, charm, and a sense of belonging. They met one day in the college library. She was focused on her studies, trying to ignore the world around her. He'd sat across from her, flashing that confident smile. At first, she found it hard to believe he was genuinely interested in her. They seemed so different. Yet he was persistent, showing up in places she frequented, starting casual conversations, and slowly breaking down her walls. She started to believe that maybe someone like him could love someone like her. A girl with no family, no wealth, and no influential name. Their relationship blossomed, and soon they were inseparable. She found herself relying on him in ways she hadn't relied on anyone before. She believed his promises of a future together, and he seemed to embrace her dreams and her background. But as time went on, subtle cracks began to appear. Sometimes she'd catch him making disparaging comments, questioning her background, or subtly pointing out their differences. She brushed it off, thinking he didn't mean it, that he was only teasing. As their relationship deepened, they faced judgment from friends and even family. His parents had been vocal about their disapproval, looking down on her as an outsider. But she thought his love was genuine, believing that he would stand by her. After all, they'd spent years together, supporting each other through college and the challenges that came with it. When she found out she was pregnant, her heart filled with both excitement and fear. She thought he'd be happy, that this would bring them even closer. Yet, on that fateful train trip, everything changed. She noticed his distant behavior, the coldness in his voice as he avoided eye contact. And then, as the train sped down the tracks, he turned to her with a look she'd never seen before, a mix of disgust and anger. His words struck her like a blow. "Goodbye to hell," he sneered. "I don't want a black baby like you. I don't want any part of you in my life." His tone was venomous, each word dripping with hatred she'd never expected from the man she thought loved her. Before she could process his words, he reached out and pushed her, his hands cold and forceful, sending her tumbling from the train. She fell hard, her body hitting the tracks, the world around her spinning as she lost consciousness. Hospital heartbreak. A life shattered. When she opened her eyes, the world around her was blurry, the sterile white of the hospital room pressing in on her. Her body ached, and there was a heaviness in her chest that she couldn't shake. Memories of the train, the betrayal, and the cruel words of the man she'd loved flooded back to her, each one like a fresh wound. The reality of her pain was overwhelming, but then a more profound fear seized her heart. She moved her hand instinctively to her stomach, hoping, praying for some sense of life, some indication that her baby had survived. The doctor entered the room with a solemn expression. She could sense from his face that the news was grim, but still, she clung to hope. She forced herself to ask the question that terrified her, her voice weak and trembling. "My baby. Is my baby okay?" The doctor's gaze softened, and he hesitated, as if searching for the gentlest way to break her heart. Finally, he spoke. "I'm so sorry. You lost the baby." Those words shattered her last hope. She felt as though her world had collapsed entirely and nothing was left but emptiness and despair. She lay back on the bed, silent tears streaming down her face, her entire body numb from the shock. The baby she had dreamed of, the child she had already begun to love, was gone. For days, she remained in a fog of grief, barely able to process what had happened. She had not only lost her child, but had been betrayed by the one person she thought she could trust. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see his face, hear his hateful words, and feel the cruel push that had sent her spiraling into darkness. The betrayal felt like a knife that had cut her down to her very soul. The nurses and doctors checked on her regularly, offering words of sympathy, but none of it reached her. She was lost in her own world of sorrow, replaying the events over and over, wondering how she could have been so blind, so trusting of someone who harbored such hatred. The few friends she had drifted away, too intimidated to get involved with a case that had the powerful politician's son at its center. As the days passed, her grief slowly transformed into something else, a burning desire for justice. She couldn't let him get away with this. She couldn't let him walk free after everything he had done. Alone, with no family to support her and no allies to stand by her, she vowed to seek justice for her unborn child and for herself. Alone, in her fight, seeking justice. After days of heartbreak, her sorrow began to solidify into a fierce resolve. She couldn't simply let this betrayal go unanswered. Her child's life had been cruelly taken, her trust shattered, and yet he continued on, untouched by guilt or remorse. She had no family to rely on, no close friends who were willing to go up against someone so powerful, but she wasn't going to let that stop her. With every fiber of her being, she was determined to fight, even if it meant standing alone. Her first steps were painful, each move a reminder of the injuries she was still healing from. With shaky hands, she filled out paperwork, filed complaints, and submitted requests for a court hearing. She knew her ex-boyfriend's family influence would make it nearly impossible to get any traction, but she persisted. The courthouse quickly became her second home. She spent days sitting in its cold, echoing corridors, hoping someone would listen, someone would give her case a chance. Most days, her pleas were met with polite rejections or cold stares. People whispered behind her back, warned her that she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. But she refused to give up. Her persistence became almost ritualistic. Day after day, she returned to the court, seeking justice, refusing to let his power silence her. She would wait for hours, standing outside offices, pleading with court officials, hoping someone would have the courage to take on her case. Yet every day she was reminded of how deeply his family's influence ran, as doors were shut in her face and people turned away from her, unwilling to risk crossing his powerful father. One evening, after a particularly disheartening day at the court, she found herself in the garden outside, feeling utterly defeated. The weight of everything she'd endured, losing her child, the betrayal, the endless battle for justice, felt unbearable. Tears fell freely as she sat on a bench, her hands trembling with a mix of anger and despair. She had never felt more alone in her life. As she sat there, lost in her sorrow, a soft voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you okay?" She looked up to see a man with striking blue eyes and a gentle expression standing before her. He was a young lawyer, someone she'd seen around the court but had never spoken to. Without meaning to, she lashed out, her anger spilling over. "Why does it matter to you? Just leave me alone," she snapped, frustrated by yet another person who she assumed would walk away. But he didn't walk away. Instead, he took a seat on the bench beside her, undeterred by her reaction. "I've seen you here every day, fighting for something that clearly matters a lot to you. I don't know your story, but I'd like to help if I can, he said, his voice kind but resolute. She was hesitant at first, wary of trusting someone again, but something in his eyes, his calm persistence, encouraged her to open up. Slowly, painfully, she shared her story, how her ex-boyfriend had betrayed her, pushed her off a moving train and taken away her unborn child, and how she'd been struggling alone ever since to get justice. She could see his expression shift from empathy to determination as he listened. After hearing her story, he looked her in the eyes and said firmly, "If you're willing, I'll stand by you. We'll take this to court, and we won't let him walk away from what he's done." For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. With a deep breath, she nodded, feeling a renewed strength within her. The fight was far from over, but now she had someone by her side who believed in her cause just as fiercely as she did. The challenge: standing against power. With newfound hope and a determined ally by her side, she began the legal battle she had dreamed of but never thought possible. The young lawyer, now fully committed, started, preparing the case with meticulous attention to detail, gathering evidence, compiling testimonies, and crafting a strategy that could withstand even the most powerful opposition. Together, they began their journey to expose her ex-boyfriend's cruelty and bring him to justice. But the challenges were immediate and overwhelming. Her ex-boyfriend's family, wealthy and well-connected, seemed to have eyes and ears everywhere. Every legal motion they filed was met with obstacles. Witnesses were intimidated into silence, evidence mysteriously went missing, and key officials seemed reluctant to involve themselves. Her ex, smug and untouchable, continued to live his life as if nothing had happened. He made no attempt to hide his disdain, mocking her efforts and flaunting his father's influence. Their first major hurdle came when they tried to formally serve him notice. The lawyer had gone through the proper channels, but every attempt was either delayed or dismissed by officials under the sway of the politician's family. Her ex-boyfriend sent a message through his associates, taunting her with his connections. "I'm the son of the city's most powerful politician," he sneered. "No one will believe you, and no one will dare touch me." But her lawyer was relentless. Each setback only strengthened his resolve. He dug deeper, refusing to be intimidated by the system or the powerful people behind her ex. Eventually, he managed to bypass the usual channels and delivered the notice directly, catching the ex-boyfriend off guard. For the first time, her ex felt the pressure, realizing this wasn't just a minor annoyance, but a real case that could damage his reputation and his father's political career. The court date was set, but the ex-boyfriend continued to dismiss it, failing to appear and counting on his influence to keep him safe. He began spreading rumors to discredit her, painting her as an unstable woman seeking revenge, using his network to manipulate the narrative. Even those who were sympathetic to her story began to doubt, wondering if she was truly capable of winning against such a powerful figure. But the lawyer didn't back down. He enlisted the help of a small group of colleagues who were equally dedicated to justice, forming a tight-knit team that worked tirelessly, even risking their own reputations to see this case through. Her lawyer, deeply invested, was more than just her legal counsel. He became her anchor, her unwavering support in a sea of doubt. Finally, on the day of the hearing, he walked into court with her by his side, both of them ready to face the mountain of influence and power stacked against them. The ex-boyfriend arrived, flanked by his father's associates, wearing a smug, defiant expression. His confidence was palpable. He still believed he was above the law, that his father's name would shield him from any consequences. But as the lawyer began presenting their case, it became clear that this was different. He laid out the evidence with a precision that left no room for doubt. each detail painting a picture of betrayal, cruelty, and a blatant disregard for human life. The court grew tense as he recounted the incident, describing the train journey, the hateful words, and the moment she was thrown onto the tracks. Her ex-boyfriend's confidence began to falter. The lawyer's persistence, combined with the truth of her story, was undeniable. By the time he finished his opening statement, the entire courtroom was silent, every eye on the accused. The judge looked stern, taking in every word. For the first time, she saw a crack in her ex's arrogant facade. She felt a glimmer of triumph, knowing that, against all odds, they had forced him to face the consequences of his actions. The battle was far from over, but they had made their mark, and now the wheels of justice had finally begun to turn. The courtroom showdown. Justice on the line. The courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and members of the public, all drawn by the scandalous case that had captured the city's attention. Her ex-boyfriend sat at the defense table, his once smug expression replaced with a nervous edge. His powerful father sat nearby, watching every move with a look of disdain directed at her and her lawyer. The air was thick with tension as the judge entered, and everyone rose. This was the moment she'd been fighting for, a chance to make her voice heard and expose the truth. The young lawyer stood confidently, his calm demeanor masking the weight of the fight they were up against. He began his case with a powerful opening statement, outlining the events that had led to this day. He described the cruelty she had endured, the trauma of losing her child, and the calculated attempt by her ex-boyfriend to evade responsibility. The courtroom listened in silence, captivated by his words. He painted a vivid picture of a woman betrayed by the man she trusted, someone who had abused his privilege to commit an unimaginable crime. Her ex-boyfriend's lawyer quickly objected, dismissing the claims as exaggerated and unfounded. He argued that she had no solid evidence and that her story was a fabrication designed to harm the reputation of a respected family. But her lawyer didn't back down. With methodical precision, he presented witness testimonies, medical reports, and statements from doctors and police officers, each piece building a case that was hard to refute. When it came time for her to testify, she walked to the stand with a mixture of nerves and determination. Facing her ex-boyfriend across the room was one of the hardest moments of her life, but she took a deep breath and began to recount her story. She described in painful detail the train ride, the hateful words he had spoken, and the moment he had pushed her, sending her life into chaos. Her voice cracked, but she continued, sharing the heartbreak of waking up in the hospital to learn her baby was gone. The entire courtroom listened in silence, some spectators even wiping away tears. The defense attempted to shake her story, questioning her character and motives, but her strength and truthfulness were undeniable. Her lawyer intervened whenever necessary, protecting her from the attempts to undermine her credibility. The defense's strategy began to crumble, their once powerful stance now weakened in the face of her unwavering testimony. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the cross-examination of her ex-boyfriend. As he took the stand, his cocky demeanor faltered. Her lawyer wasted no time, pressing him with questions that grew increasingly uncomfortable. Her ex tried to dodge the questions, but the lawyer was relentless, dissecting each of his answers until he had no choice but to face the truth. Under intense pressure, her ex-boyfriend's defenses started to crack. His arrogance gave way to frustration, and in a moment of weakness, he slipped up, admitting to more than he intended. The courtroom gasped as he acknowledged he never wanted that child, and that she was just a burden. It was clear to everyone present that this wasn't just a tragic accident, but a premeditated act of cruelty. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was stern, commanding the attention of the entire room. "In my courtroom," he declared, "justice doesn't bow to power or privilege." He turned to her ex, his gaze sharp. "Your father's influence won't protect you here. The law is blind to power, and today it sees the truth." The sentence was announced. 10 years in prison, doubled from the initial recommendation due to the gravity of his actions. Her ex-boyfriend's face drained of color, his bravado shattered. She felt a rush of relief and triumph, knowing that despite everything, justice had been served. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the reality of the verdict sank in. She had done it. She had stood up to the impossible, and with the help of her lawyer, she had won. A new beginning. Love after loss. As the courtroom cleared out and the buzz of the trial faded, she found herself standing alone in the quiet corridors of the courthouse, absorbing what had just happened. It felt surreal. After so much pain, betrayal, and heartbreak, she had finally won a battle she'd once thought impossible. Justice had been served, and her ex-boyfriend was facing the consequences of his cruelty. For the first time in what felt like ages, she could breathe a sigh of relief. The young lawyer, her unexpected ally, approached her with a soft, reassuring smile. "It's over," he said gently, his voice filled with a warmth that made her feel safe. "You did it. We did it." She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. This man, who had once been a stranger, had stood by her when no one else would. He had fought for her when she felt utterly alone, and he had given her the courage to believe in justice again. Over the next few weeks, they spent a lot of time together as he continued to support her through the aftermath of the trial. What began as a simple partnership for justice had grown into a deep bond. They shared stories, laughter, and even moments of vulnerability. He had seen her at her lowest, and he had been there through her journey to rise above the pain. Slowly, she found herself smiling again, feeling the beginnings of a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, as they were walking through the city park, he stopped and looked at her with a tender expression. "I know you've been through so much, and I can't change what's happened," he said, taking her hand gently. "But I'd like to be there for you, if you'll let me. I'd like to share this new beginning with you." Her heart raced, a mix of emotions flooding through her. She had lost so much, and trusting someone again was terrifying, but there was something undeniable between them. An understanding, a connection that had grown out of compassion and shared struggles. She knew he was sincere, that he saw her not as a victim, but as the resilient woman she had become. With a soft smile, she nodded, accepting his proposal to take this journey together. From that moment on, they began to build a life together. He became her source of strength and joy, helping her heal and supporting her as she slowly reclaimed the happiness she thought she had lost forever. Their bond deepened, and over time they married, creating a family of their own. Their love was built on trust, resilience, and a shared commitment to protect each other. They moved to New York, where they started a new chapter, far from the memories of her past. They built a life filled with love, laughter, and healing, finding joy in the family they created, in their cozy apartment surrounded by laughter and the warmth of their 2 beautiful children. She knew she had finally found peace. Her journey had been painful, but in the end, it had led her to a place of love and hope. The scars of her past were still there, but they had become a part of her story, a story of strength, survival, and the beauty of second chances. Building a life together, love and healing in New York. In New York, far from the haunting memories of her past, they began their new life together, each day a step further from the pain she had endured. The city felt like a fresh start, a place where they could build a life without the shadows of the past looming over them. Together, they settled into a cozy apartment, the walls soon adorned with reminders of their journey, from their first court victory to the day he had asked her to share her life with him. Her husband continued his work as a lawyer, dedicated to helping those who had no voice, often championing cases that required courage and resilience. Inspired by him, she also found her calling, joining organizations that helped women and children in need. She wanted to be a source of strength for others, a guiding light for those going through similar struggles. Her past had given her an understanding and empathy that made her invaluable to the people she helped. She was no longer just surviving, she was making a difference. The arrival of their children, a boy and a girl, marked the start of a new chapter filled with joy and laughter. Each day she watched them grow, filled with a love that helped to heal the broken parts of her heart. She was finally surrounded by a family she could call her own, a family built on trust, love, and resilience. Every bedtime story, every shared meal, and every quiet moment with her husband reminded her of the peace and happiness she had found. But even in her new life, she never forgot where she had come from. The memories of her fight for justice and the strength she found in herself became stories she would one day share with her children. She wanted them to know that love and kindness could conquer hate, that courage was stronger than fear, and that even the deepest wounds could heal. Together, they created a life filled with purpose and compassion, using their experiences to uplift others. They were no longer just a couple bound by circumstance. They were partners, parents, and a source of hope for others. In New York, they built not only a family, but also a legacy of love, resilience, and healing, proving that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest of futures. A legacy of strength, finding peace and purpose. Years passed, and their life in New York blossomed into one filled with peace, purpose, and fulfillment. The journey had been long and painful, marked by betrayal and unimaginable loss, but together they had transformed that pain into something beautiful. Their story became an inspiration for many, a testament to the power of resilience, justice, and the strength to move beyond even the darkest of times. Their children grew up surrounded by love, nurtured in a home where kindness, empathy, and strength were the foundation. She shared her past with them, not as a burden, but as a lesson in courage and determination. They learned about their mother's fight for justice, her unwavering resolve, and the courage it took to rebuild her life. She wanted them to understand that life wouldn't always be easy, but that they had the power within themselves to face anything, just as she had. As the years went by, she and her husband dedicated themselves to helping others. Together, they opened a foundation focused on supporting survivors of abuse and injustice, a safe haven for those who felt alone and powerless. Through their work, they provided resources, legal aid, and emotional support, becoming champions for the very people they once had been. Looking back, she realized that her life had come full circle. The scars of her past remained, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they were reminders of the journey she had undertaken, each scar a symbol of her strength and resilience. With her husband by her side, she had not only built a life filled with love and joy, but had also created a legacy that would empower others long after she was gone. In the end, she had found more than just justice. She had found peace, purpose, and a love that would endure forever. Their family, their foundation, and their unwavering commitment to helping others stood as proof that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest futures.